Hey, it's Craig. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Canadian History X early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Hey everyone, Craig Baird here. Before I begin today's story, I want to take a moment to ask you to check me out on Patreon. There are several tiers with great benefits, including ad-free episodes delivered early to patrons. You can also donate directly to the show at www.canadaehx.com through Buy Me a Coffee or through e-transfer at crwbaird@gmail.com. Donations help keep the show going. I've also released my first history book, Canada's Main Street, the epic story of the Trans-Canada Highway. You can find it in most bookstores in Canada and through online retailers. You can find the links for Patreon, donating, and my book in my show notes. Okay, let's get to the show. A bitter cold wind blew towards a crowd of people who stood shivering and waiting. In front of them, an oil derrick stood silent. But deep underground, something was brewing. For months, the drill had been breaking through layers of rock, and then it hit something. Oil. Trapped for millennia, it rushed to escape. And on the surface, the ground shook at the feet of the crowd who prepared for what was to come. With a whoosh, the liquid gold came shooting out. And in that moment, Canada's future changed. I'm Craig Baird, and this is Canadian History X. This month, I'm focusing on the history of my home province of Alberta. In this episode, I share the story of how oil was discovered and how it helped reshape the Wild Rose province. This is Leduc number 1. As I write this from my home in central Alberta, I am surrounded by open prairie. But 400 million years ago, this very spot was part of a vast, shallow sea that stretched from Alaska down to southern Mexico. And that's how you can find fossils for over 200 marine species at the top of a mountain at the Burgess Shale site in Yoho National Park in British Columbia. For millennia, billions of creatures lived, died, and sank to the bottom of the sea. Over time, they were covered with silt. Then, as the continent shifted, all those carcasses were buried deeper and compressed by the weight of the land above. This immense pressure, coupled with the heat of the Earth's core, turned the previously organic matter into hydrocarbons, aka oil. Most of which was buried deep, except in areas where it reached the surface. Indigenous peoples in what became present-day Alberta used it to pitch their canoes for waterproofing and also as a medicinal ointment. Peter Pond was the first European to write about Alberta's oil in 1788, and he described it as thick, black, and oozing from the banks of the Athabasca River. In the late 1800s, geologist and surveyor George Mercer Dawson found oil and natural gas in the Rockies where Waterton National Park is now located, and by 1901, John Lynham, a businessman from Calgary, had installed a wood rig with a 35-horsepower steam engine to begin drilling. He followed Dawson's reports, and at 311 meters, the rig struck oil and would go on to produce 300 barrels per day. By the time the well was abandoned, it had produced 8,000 barrels of oil. A decade later, William S. Heron drilled a well near Turner Valley, about an hour southwest of Calgary on the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. He drilled for 2 years, until May 14, 1914, when he hit natural gas that produced gasoline but little oil. But within days, 500 oil exploration companies were formed, and the first oil boom was on, and much like the gold rushes, there were plenty of scammers and grifters. Only about 50 companies were actually legit. The rest were made up of people looking to make a quick buck of investors. Anyone who could drive traveled to Turner Valley with cars full of passengers. Those who couldn't buy land to drill bought up stocks and shares in the oil field with many fraudulent companies. There was another problem. Because oil fields had limited oil, production eventually declined, and by the 1930s and 1940s, many companies had drilled expensive wells across Alberta with little success. Then in 1936, at a depth of 2 kilometers, crude oil was discovered in Turner Valley. Within 5 years, it was the largest known oil field in the British Empire. And meanwhile, oil companies kept trying elsewhere. Imperial Oil was partly owned by Standard Oil of New Jersey, later Exxon, And by the mid-1940s, they had spent millions on dry holes as the next big oil strike remained elusive. In 1944, the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation came to power under Saskatchewan's Premier Tommy Douglas, and almost immediately his government sought to keep money in province. Now remember, the Second World War was happening across the pond, and funneling provincial funds to companies like Imperial Oil didn't make much sense. And while Douglas is often viewed as a rabid socialist, his government welcomed large multinational oil companies to develop Saskatchewan's resources. But when Imperial Oil proposed a deal that gave them exploration rights if oil was found, the Saskatchewan government refused. So, Imperial Oil packed up and moved to Alberta. The modest agricultural province was more than happy to push oil exploration because it had been struggling economically. And Imperial Oil was about to make Alberta into the center of Canada's oil industry. Before 1947, many people believed Alberta had a lot of oil, but no one could find it in large quantities. And Imperial Oil had been trying to find it more than most. 133 times. That is how many times they had drilled in the search of oil from 1920 to 1946. It had cost the company $23 million with zero return. Things had reached the point that Imperial Oil was actually going to give up to focus on gas synthesis instead. In April 1946, a board meeting was held where the directors decided to drill one more hole, one more gamble, one more pull on the slot machine, so to speak. But where would they drill? They posed the question to 32 company geologists, and Ted Link was one of them. He believed the entire province was underlain by sedimentary rock, which can be regarded as possible sources of hydrocarbons, but he believed everyone had been drilling in the wrong places. He believed large oil reserves were trapped in the Devonian reef formations buried deep underground. Seismic surveys and geological analysis across 13,000 square kilometers of central Alberta took place in the summer of 1946, and they pointed to two promising spots. One was near Pigeon Lake, 50 kilometers southwest of Edmonton. The second was 10 kilometers south of Edmonton, near Leduc. And while geologists believed Pigeon Lake was the better option, drilling there required building an access road, whereas Leduc was just off the main highway. Now, Mike Turda was a farmer in the little hamlet of Leduc, but he didn't have the mineral rights for his land. Those were owned by First World War veteran Eric Harvey. And in the 1940s, he had attempted to buy land around Turner Valley oil fields, but was unsuccessful. Instead, he chose to buy the mineral rights to about 2,000 square kilometers of land in the Leduc area. This would be a fortuitous decision. Imperial Oil paid Mike Turda $250 a year to lease the land, and they got down to work. Now, there were no other oil rigs within 80 kilometers, and there was no guarantee of success. Dan Claypool with Leduc No. 1 Energy and Discovery Center says it was a big gamble for the company.
You got to remember that if you were believing in your seismic and you drill 133 dry holes, you become a little disappointed. However, you're still relying, it's the only thing that you have to do.
The company was taking another big gamble. Not only were they going to drill where no one else was looking, they'd put this Hail Mary pass in the hands of Vern Hunter. His nickname was Dry Hole. Vern Hunter was born in Nanton, Alberta, south of Calgary in 1906, and his mentor became his scoutmaster, George R. Perks. Perks was a veteran of the First World War and had received the British Empire's highest honor, the Victoria Cross, for bravery. He later became the Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia. Now, Perks was very impressed with Vern Hunter's work ethic and enthusiasm as a scout and kept in contact with him, and eventually he helped Hunter find a job with Royal Light Oil at their head office, and with time, Hunter made the move from the desk to the field at Turner Valley. And by 1934, he was making $10 for a 12-hour shift with no days off, no vacation, and no sick leave. It was the Great Depression, so honestly, Hunter was just glad to have the work. 10 years went by and Hunter was with Imperial Oil, supervising drill rigs in the field. And by now, he had already earned his nickname for drilling dry wells, but his work ethic kept him employed. Hunter said, "Early in October of 1946, Charlie Visor, Imperial's drilling superintendent, informed us we were to go to Leduc from Provost. We were quite happy to move as we were getting itchy feet from staying too long in one town, but fully realized that no oil could possibly be found within 20 miles of a city like Edmonton. Over the course of 4 weeks, the rig in Provost was dismantled and shipped to the new drill site, and by November 20th, 1946, drilling began, but things didn't start off well. That night, temperatures plummeted to minus 35 degrees Celsius, making work difficult for the crew. At one point, a rig worker who had spent an 8-hour shift on top of the derrick discovered he couldn't move. Unbeknownst to him, a button on the back flap of his fleece-long long johns had come undone and his buttocks had frozen. And safety on the rigs was never guaranteed or truly followed. Leo Cassidy was another man on the crew, and he washed his overalls in gasoline and then hung them to dry in the boiler room where the fumes caught fire and burned the boiler house to the ground. But despite these mishaps, work continued, but the mood? That was sour. Nearby farmhands had been employed on the rig, and they placed bets on how long it would be before they were back milking cows. The work was slow and hard. To see if the drill had hit oil, it meant drilling for 4 hours, then bringing the drill back up, and Dan Claypool said progress was very slow.
While you're drilling a wildcat well, which it was, you're doing a whole bunch of tests, and every now and then they would drill into a formation and find there was some oil. And then they would drill into another formation and find that there was some oil.
At the time, most rigs would only reach 600 meters in depth. This was known as the Mesozoic depth, which refers to the position of 252 to 66 million year old rock layers. The rig in Leduc had found some oil, so they decided to go deeper, and in doing so, the drill entered the Devonian era. This meant they had reached 1,500 meters below ground, where the soil was 400 million years old. This was the geological period and system of the Paleozoic era, known as the Age of Fishes because of a rapid marine diversification and the emergence of the first forests. And during this time, Leduc was on the other side of the world, near the equator, and underwater. So when the workers reached this depth in 1947, the mood had improved, but not by much. The work was hard, and living conditions weren't great. Leduc was a small town with very few places to sleep, and most men had to share rooms. Those who couldn't find hotel rooms were sleeping in the fire hall, which meant the town wasn't excited to have a bunch of rough men hanging about either. Winter was upon them, and hostilities grew. Crew members who couldn't find any place to stay just built shacks as the drilling continued, and by January, Vern Hunter knew this Hail Mary pass was going to score a win. The latest tests showed signs of oil, and with each passing day, mood improved and excitement grew. The higher-ups at Imperial Oil were informed, and with that came pressure. The executives wanted to have government and industry officials on site when Vern Hunter burst through and oil came pouring out like a geyser of black gold. But Hunter couldn't give them specific dates, and something else was nagging him. His nickname was Dryhole. He knew how to dig, find nothing, and abandon. He actually had very little experience finding oil. So with no other option, Vern chose February 13th, 1947 as the date they would find oil, and he prayed he was right. As the day fast approached, drilling continued. At the crack of dawn on February 13th, the drill crew started swabbing the well to remove accumulated fluids and allow the oil to flow easily to the surface. From 6 a.m. to 8 a.m., the crew swabbed the well, and then Hunter went home for breakfast. Dan Claypool said he returned to a bit of a disaster.
All of a sudden, their equipment broke down, and they'd already told everybody, we're going to show you this oil discovery, and all of a sudden they couldn't do it because they couldn't bring the well in.
They fixed the rig, and everyone waited with bated breath. A crowd had also been gathering since before noon. The road leading to the well was so congested that the afternoon rig crew couldn't get to the site without cutting barbed wire fences to drive their truck through neighboring fields. And the bitter cold and wind hadn't kept onlookers away. Some had crowded into the boiler room and actually slowed down workers from keeping the rig going because they couldn't shovel coal in. They had scheduled the discovery for 1 p.m., and it quickly became 2 p.m. And Vern Hunter started to sweat with worry. By 3 p.m., some people had been waiting for almost 5 hours as disappointment spread through the crowd. But some held out hope. They would be right. Because just before 4 p.m., the ground started to shake, and then with a roar, oil burst from the top of the rig. Vern Hunter had picked the right date, and Imperial Oil had picked the right man. Both of their dry spells were over. John Funk was just 22 years old, and he was the youngest crew member on site, and he was given the special honor of taking an oil-soaked rag and throwing it into the oil stream. He said, "I swung the burning, oil-soaked sack around my head and let it fly. Up it soared to the top of the flare line. Whoosh! Flames and black smoke shot into the air. The well belched a few times as it cleared itself out, then a perfect smoke ring formed and floated off into the clear, cold air. People said that was a good omen." In that moment, John Funk had changed Canada's energy future and Alberta's fate forever. The rig was known as Leduc No. 1. Before it discovered the oil reserve, Canada had produced only 21,000 barrels of oil per day, most of that coming from Turner Valley. At the time, the country consumed 10 times that amount each day, and nearly 90% of our oil came from the United States. And almost overnight, the news of the oil strike led to more drilling in the area. Dan Claypool was a young man at the time.
We had a little radio on the dash of my car, and the radio said there's a discovery at Leduc. So we were out of work on this ranch, so we decided to take our summer's wages and we bought a car and we hiked her north to find this discovery, see if there was some work. And it turned out that by the time we got there, there was 100 rigs drilling as a result of the discovery. And of course, immediately I walked out to one of these rigs and said, "Can I get a job?" And they had one question: "Are you a farm boy?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "You're hired."
In less than 10 years, Canada would be producing most of its own oil, with most of that coming from Alberta. Production jumped from 7.7 million barrels of oil in 1946 to 144 million barrels within a decade. Today, Canada ranks 5th in the world behind Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Iraq in terms of our oil reserves. There's an estimated 3 billion barrels of oil still waiting to be tapped. And the Leduc Woodbend field, where Imperial Oil hit pay dirt, well, that would produce 250 million barrels of oil in 50 years. And Leduc No. 1 continued to operate until 1974, and by then it had produced 317,000 barrels of oil. As the oil rigs popped up across Alberta, the population boomed. Before Leduc No. 1, the province had a population of 803,000 people, slightly less than that of Saskatchewan. Within 5 years, the population had passed 1 million. Saskatchewan wouldn't hit that milestone until 1983. The boom led to oil company towns like Devon. Created to house Imperial Oil's workers and located near Leduc No. 1, people began to move to the town in 1948. But there was little infrastructure, sidewalks, and streets weren't paved. It was little more than a plowed field, and when it rained, residents were up to their knees in mud. Today, if you travel just a few minutes south of Devon, you can find the Leduc No. 1 Energy and Discovery Center. It opened in 1997 and helped celebrate the history of the oil strike with exhibits about the oil industry as well as artifacts and equipment from the early days. It is there you can see Leduc No. 1, which is now a National Historic Site of Canada. But you might be wondering, what happened to Eric Harvey, the man who owned the mineral rights on the farmland where Leduc No. 1 is located? Eric Harvey had purchased the mineral rights to 2,000 square kilometers of land for $12,840. That was a bargain, at only $6.42 per square kilometer. And once Leduc No. 1 erupted, Eric Harvey became a very rich man. He owned the Leduc oil field and another one north of Edmonton in Redwater, and with his fortune, he gave back to Alberta. In 1966, he founded the Glenbow Alberta Institute, which became the Glenbow Museum in Calgary. His initial donation of $10 million helped the museum curate 33,000 pieces of art, a huge number of photographs, films, and sound recordings, and some of the most important historical artifacts in Western Canada. And Harvey wasn't done. He joked that he wanted to die broke. So, he helped fund the Confederation Center of the Arts, the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic, the Devonian Gardens, and the Buffalo Nation's Luxon Museum. In 1962, the Blackfoot Nation made him an honorary chief, and in 1967 he received the Order of Canada. He died in 1975, and many may not have known his role in changing our nation. From the discovery that made Canada into an oil powerhouse to the people he helped preserve and celebrate its history, the story of Alberta is built not only on resources but on vision. And one of those early visionaries was Eric Harvey, whose dedication to arts, culture, and community helped shape how Albertans remember their past and imagine their future. This show is researched, produced, and written by me, Craig Baird, with the help of Dila Velasquez. Audio production and design by Rosalind Kufor. If this is your first time listening and you like what you heard, please take a moment and give us a 5-star review to help other people find these amazing stories, and there are so many for you to sink your teeth into. If you enjoy this podcast, then please check out my other podcasts, From John to Justin, Canada, A Yearly Journey, Pucks and Cups, and Canada's Great War. We love hearing from you, so if you have a show topic you want me to cover, email me at craig@canadaehx.com, or stop by my website and social media. I'll include all of those in my show notes. Until next time, I'm Craig Baird, and this is Canadian History X.